The scream that tore through the autumn forest was not hers. Vera Proudmane heard it echo between the old pines and birches. A man's voice cracking with fear, calling a name over and over until the word became meaningless sound. She had been gathering late mushrooms in a wicker basket slung across her back, moving quietly as she always did through these woods that formed the border between the Orcish highlands and human farmland, when the shouting began. Most days she would have melted deeper into the trees, away from human voices and human trouble, but this cry was different. This was the sound of someone losing everything. She moved toward it, her leather boots silent on the carpet of fallen leaves, and found the child first. A small girl, perhaps 5 years old, with tangled brown hair and a dress torn at the hem, sitting at the base of a massive oak with her knees drawn to her chest. The child's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide and empty in a way that made Vera's chest tighten. She was not crying now. She was not making any sound at all. She simply stared at nothing, rocking slightly back and forth. Vera knelt slowly, setting her basket aside. "Hello, little one," she said softly, keeping her voice low and steady. "Are you lost?" The girl's eyes shifted to her, taking in the green skin, the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw, the pointed ears. For a moment, Vera expected the usual response: screaming, running, terror, but instead the child just looked at her with that same empty expression and said nothing. "Your father is looking for you," Vera tried again. "I can hear him calling. Shall we go to him?" Still nothing. The child simply stared. Vera held out her hand, palm up, waiting. After a long moment, the girl reached out and placed her small hand in Vera's larger one. Her fingers were cold. Vera closed her hand gently around them and stood, and the child rose with her, silent and docile as a ghost. They walked together through the forest, following the sound of the man's increasingly desperate calls, and when they emerged into a clearing where the trees thinned, Vera saw him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair beginning to show threads of silver at the temples, wearing the rough clothes of a farmer or woodsman. His face was haggard with fear, his eyes wild as he turned in circles, calling the name Elspeth, until his voice went hoarse. "Here," Vera called out, and he spun toward her. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the clearing, the orc woman with her basket and her green skin, and her gentle grip on the child's hand, and the human man with his terror and his relief crashing together on his face. Then he was running toward them, stumbling over roots and rocks in his haste. "Elspeth," he gasped, dropping to his knees in front of the girl. "Oh God, Elspeth," I thought. He reached for her, but the moment his hands touched her shoulders, she jerked away and pressed herself against Vera's leg, her free hand clutching at Vera's skirt. The man froze. His arms hung in the air for a moment before he slowly lowered them. "Elspeth." His voice cracked. "It's me, it's Father, you're safe now." The girl said nothing. Her hand tightened around Vera's. Vera felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "She has not spoken," she said quietly. "I found her by the old oak, sitting alone. She came with me without protest, but she has not made a sound." The man, his name was Xavier Thorne, she would learn later, looked up at her, and she saw him truly register her presence for the first time. She watched the flicker of uncertainty cross his face, the automatic wariness humans always showed when confronted with an orc, but it was overshadowed by his desperation. "Is she hurt? Did something happen to her?" "I found her as you see her now," Vera said. "No injuries that I could see. Only—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Only this silence." Xavier tried again to reach for his daughter, making his movements slow and gentle, but again Elspeth shrank away from him. When he persisted, trying to take her other hand, she made a small sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a cry, and clung to Vera with both arms, refusing to let go of Vera's hand even as she wrapped herself around the orc woman's leg. "I don't understand," Xavier said, and the pain in his voice was raw enough to cut. "She's been like this since her mother died 3 months ago. She stopped talking, stopped eating properly, but she's never pulled away from me before." "She's never," he stopped, pressing his palm against his eyes. "What did I do wrong?" Vera felt the child trembling against her leg. She reached down with her free hand and gently stroked Elspeth's hair. "Perhaps it is not what you did," she said softly. "Perhaps it is what she needs that has changed." They stood in uncomfortable silence for a long moment, Xavier kneeling in the dirt, his daughter clinging to a stranger, the autumn wind moving through the trees around them. Finally, Vera spoke again. "Where do you live? I will walk with you." "Perhaps she will be more willing once she is home." Xavier nodded slowly, climbing to his feet. He looked defeated in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength. "Half a mile east," he said. "Through the trees and across the creek, I have a farm at the forest's edge." They walked in near silence, Xavier leading the way along a narrow path, while Vera followed with Elspeth's hand still locked in hers. The child walked obediently, her steps matching Vera's, never once looking at her father's back. Vera tried twice to release her hand gently, thinking perhaps the girl would be more comfortable without the constant contact, but each time Elspeth's fingers tightened with surprising strength, and her breath quickened in a way that suggested the beginnings of panic. So Vera held on. The farm was modest but well kept, a small cottage with a thatched roof, a barn, and several fields that had been recently harvested. Chickens scratched in the yard. A milk cow watched them pass with mild interest. Xavier opened the cottage door and stood aside, gesturing for them to enter. Inside was clean but sparse, with the particular kind of emptiness that spoke of recent loss. There were bare places on the walls where decorations had hung, gaps on shelves where objects had been removed. The hearth was cold. The table had been set for 2, not 3. Xavier moved automatically to light a fire, his hands shaking slightly as he worked with the flint and tinder. Vera stood just inside the doorway with Elspeth still attached to her, unsure of what she was supposed to do now. She had brought the child home. Her task was complete. She should leave. But when she took a small step toward the door, Elspeth's grip became painful. "Please," Xavier said without turning around. The word came out rough and tired. "Don't go yet. Just until I can figure out how to." He trailed off, staring at the kindling that refused to catch. Vera sighed quietly and moved to the table, settling into a chair. Elspeth immediately climbed into her lap, still holding her hand, and tucked herself against Vera's chest like a much younger child. Vera could feel the rapid flutter of the girl's heartbeat, the way she was still trembling despite the warmth of the cottage. Xavier finally got the fire started and stood, dusting off his hands. When he turned and saw his daughter curled in the lap of an orc woman, sitting in the chair where his wife must have once sat, something in his expression crumpled. He caught himself quickly, but not before Vera saw it. "I should make tea," he said to no one in particular. "Or soup." "She hasn't eaten today. She was supposed to be playing in the garden while I worked, but I turned my back for just a moment and she was gone. I searched for hours. I thought," he stopped, his jaw working. "I thought I had lost her too." "You did not," Vera said firmly. "She is here. She is safe." Xavier busied himself with the kettle and the fire, moving with the automatic efficiency of someone who had learned to care for a household alone. Vera watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided looking at them directly. He was younger than she had first thought, probably in his early 30s, but grief had aged him. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worries that never ended. When he brought tea and a small bowl of stew left over from the previous day, Elspeth refused to eat until Vera lifted the spoon herself and coaxed her to take small bites. Even then, she only ate a little before turning her face away, her hand never leaving Vera's. "She used to eat anything," Xavier said quietly, sitting in the chair across from them. His own tea sat untouched. "She used to laugh and run and chatter from morning until night. Her mother called her a little songbird." He smiled faintly, painfully. "The silence is worse than anything. Worse than the grief, worse than the loneliness. At least when you grieve you can scream. But this is like living with a ghost." Vera looked down at the child in her lap. Elspeth's eyes were closed now, her breathing slow and even. She had fallen asleep mid-bite, exhausted from her ordeal. "What happened to her mother?" she asked quietly. Xavier's hands tightened around his mug. "Fever," he said. "It came on fast. One day she was well, the next she was burning up, and 3 days later she was gone." Elspeth watched it all. She was there when he stopped, swallowing hard. "She hasn't spoken since the day we buried her. The village healer says it's shock, that she'll recover in time, but it's been 3 months and there's been no change. If anything, she's getting worse." The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the autumn wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Vera shifted carefully, adjusting her hold on the sleeping child, and Elspeth's hand tightened reflexively around hers even in sleep. "I need to go home," Vera said softly, though she made no move to stand. "My own cottage is an hour's walk from here and night is falling." "I know," Xavier said. He looked at his daughter, then at Vera, then down at his hands. "But if you try to leave now, she'll wake, and if she wakes and finds you gone." He didn't finish the sentence. They sat in silence as the shadows lengthened and the fire burned low. Eventually Xavier rose and added more wood, then moved to light candles around the room. The small cottage filled with warm yellow light, pushing back the darkness. Elspeth slept on, her face peaceful for the first time since Vera had found her, her small body relaxed in a way that suggested she felt safe. "You can stay," Xavier said abruptly. "Tonight, I mean. There's a spare room." He paused. "It's just a spare room. It has a bed, if you're willing." Vera studied him carefully. There was no threat in his posture, no suggestion of anything inappropriate, only desperate hope and exhausted gratitude. She should refuse. She should wake the child and leave, let the man deal with his own daughter's trauma. But when she looked down at Elspeth's sleeping face, at the way the girl's hand still gripped hers like a lifeline, she found herself nodding. "For tonight," she said, "to help her settle, but tomorrow I must return home." Xavier's relief was visible. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know this is strange. I know you don't owe us anything, but thank you." He showed her to the spare room, which was indeed just a spare room, a narrow bed, a small table, a chest for storage. It smelled faintly of herbs and dust, like a space that had not been used in some time. Vera laid Elspeth on the bed and tried once again to extract her hand, moving slowly and gently, but the moment her fingers began to slip free, Elspeth's eyes flew open and she grabbed on with both hands, a small sound of panic escaping her throat. "Hush, little one," Vera murmured. "I am not leaving, I am here." Elspeth's eyes searched her face in the candlelight, wide and uncertain. Then, apparently satisfied, she settled back down, still holding Vera's hand. Xavier stood in the doorway, a complicated expression on his face. "I'll be in the next room," he said. "If you need anything, and I thank you." Again. Vera nodded and he withdrew, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. She settled onto the bed as best she could with one hand trapped, arranging herself against the wall so she could at least lean back. Elspeth immediately snuggled against her side. her small body warm, her breathing deep and even within moments. For a long time Vera simply sat in the darkness, listening to the child breathe and wondering what exactly she had gotten herself into. She was not a nurturer by nature. She lived alone by choice, foraging and hunting in the borderlands, trading occasionally with the few humans who would deal with her and visiting the orcish settlements in the highlands when she needed company. She had no children of her own, no family to speak of. The solitary life suited her. And yet here she was, trapped in a stranger's house by the desperate grip of a traumatized child, and she found she could not bring herself to pull away. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with frost on the windows and the promise of winter in the air. Vera woke to find Elspeth already awake, watching her with those serious, silent eyes. The child's hand was still wrapped around hers. "Good morning," Vera said softly. Elspeth said nothing, but she blinked, which was something. They emerged from the room to find Xavier already up and working on breakfast porridge with honey and dried apples. Fresh bread that he must have bought from town. A pot of tea. He looked like he had not slept well, with dark circles under his eyes and his hair uncombed, but he moved with purpose as he set the table. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, glancing at Vera. "Both of you." They sat, and once again Elspeth would only eat when Vera fed her, taking small bites of porridge with her free hand while the other remained locked around Vera's fingers. Xavier ate mechanically, watching them with an expression that shifted between gratitude and something that might have been grief or envy or both. When breakfast was finished, Vera finally spoke the words that had been sitting heavy in her chest. "I must go home now. I have my own life, my own work. I am sorry, but I cannot stay." Elspeth's hand tightened immediately, her breath quickening. Xavier nodded slowly, his face falling. "I understand, of course. You've already done more than anyone could ask. I'll manage somehow. We'll manage." He did not sound convinced. Vera stood, gently bringing Elspeth with her. "Come, little one. Time to let go now. Your father is here. You are home." But when she tried to release the child's hand, Elspeth's face crumpled, and she made a sound, not quite a scream, but something close. A keening noise that was all the more terrible for how long the silence had been. She clung to Vera with both arms, her whole body shaking, tears streaming down her face without sound. Xavier moved toward them instinctively, but Elspeth only screamed louder when he came close, pressing herself against Vera as though trying to disappear into the orc woman's skirt. "Elspeth, please," Xavier said, his voice breaking. "Please, sweetheart, it's all right. Let her go, I'm here. Father is here." But Elspeth would not let go, and her silent tears were so desperate that Vera felt something crack in her chest. She looked at Xavier over the child's head, saw the naked pain on his face, and felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. "Perhaps," she heard herself say, "I could visit. Not every day. But perhaps in 2 days I could come back just to see how she is doing." Elspeth's crying quieted immediately. She pulled back just enough to look up at Vera's face, her eyes red and swollen but suddenly hopeful. Xavier stared at her. "You would do that?" "I am making no promises beyond that one visit," Vera said firmly, even as she felt herself being pulled into something she did not fully understand. "But yes, 2 days from now, in the afternoon." "Thank you," Xavier breathed. "Thank you, that's more than enough. More than I could have hoped." With the promise made, Elspeth finally, reluctantly, allowed Vera to pry her fingers loose. She did not cry again, but she watched Vera leave with such intensity that Vera could feel the weight of those eyes on her back all the way across the yard and into the tree line. The walk home through the forest felt longer than it should have, and Vera's hand felt strangely empty without the small fingers wrapped around it. 2 days later, true to her word, Vera returned. She told herself it was only the one visit, just to ease the child's transition. But when she emerged from the trees and saw Elspeth sitting on the front step of the cottage, waiting, watching the forest path with desperate attention, she knew she had already been caught in something stronger than good intentions. Elspeth ran to her the moment she appeared, and Vera caught her and lifted her up, feeling the child's arms wrap around her neck and her legs around her waist. Still no words, but the way Elspeth pressed her face against Vera's shoulder spoke volumes. Xavier came out of the cottage wiping his hands on a rag, and the relief on his face was painful to see. "She's been sitting there since dawn," he said. "I couldn't get her to eat, couldn't convince her to do anything else. She just waited." Vera carried Elspeth inside, settling into the chair that was apparently becoming hers, and the child curled into her lap like she had never left. Xavier made tea, and they sat in the warm kitchen in a silence that was less uncomfortable than it should have been. "How has she been?" Vera asked finally. Xavier sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The same, silent. She barely eats unless I coax her. She sleeps poorly. The neighbors have been kind, bringing food and offering to watch her so I can work, but she won't go to any of them. Won't let anyone touch her. Just sits and waits." He looked at his daughter with such sorrow that Vera had to glance away. "I don't understand why she's doing this. Why you, why an orc?" He stopped, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry, that sounded—" "It is a fair question," Vera said quietly. "I wonder the same thing myself." They sat with that question between them, unanswered and unanswerable, while Elspeth slowly relaxed in Vera's arms. Eventually the child fell asleep again, and Vera found herself stroking her hair without thinking about it, the gesture automatic and strangely natural. "Can I ask you something?" Xavier said after a long while. "You may ask. Why did you help her? In the forest, you could have left her there, let someone else find her. Humans haven't exactly been kind to your people. Why risk it?" Vera considered the question. "Because she was a child alone and afraid," she said simply. "Because I am not the monster your people believe me to be, no matter what your stories say. And because—" she paused, then continued more quietly. "Because I know what it is to be alone. I would not wish that on anyone, especially not a child." Xavier nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I'm grateful you didn't leave her, more grateful than I can say." He hesitated, then added, "Would you come again? I know you have your own life, your own work, but if you could spare a few hours, maybe once or twice a week, just to help her adjust, I could pay you, not much, but something." "I do not want your money," Vera said, more sharply than she intended. Then, more gently, "But yes, I will come again. For her sake, not for payment." That was how it began, the slow, strange rhythm that developed over the following weeks as autumn deepened into the first breath of winter. Vera came twice a week at first, then 3 times, then found herself walking the forest path nearly every afternoon. She told herself each time that this would be the last visit, that Elspeth would surely recover soon and no longer need her, but the child showed no signs of letting go. And stranger still, Vera found she did not truly want her to. She began to learn the rhythms of Xavier's household, the way he rose before dawn to tend the animals, the way he worked with steady persistence through the day, the way he moved through the cottage in the evening with tired efficiency. She learned that he had been a soldier once, years ago, before settling into farming life when he married. That he was a skilled woodcarver, though he rarely had time for it anymore. That he sang under his breath while he worked, old ballads in a pleasant baritone that he seemed unaware of. She learned, too, that he was gentler than his rough exterior suggested, that he loved his daughter with a fierce desperation that colored everything he did, and that the loss of his wife had carved something out of him that had not yet begun to heal. For his part, Xavier began to relax around her. The initial wariness faded as weeks passed, and Vera proved herself harmless, even helpful. She mended things around the cottage while Elspeth slept in her lap, fixed a broken shutter with skilled hands, showed him a better way to preserve the late harvest vegetables. They fell into conversations that started awkward and grew easier, talking about everything and nothing while Elspeth dozed between them. "You're good at this," Xavier said one afternoon as he watched Vera coax Elspeth into eating a full bowl of stew for the first time in weeks. "Better than I am, apparently. You are her father," Vera said. "She loves you. This is not about love." "Then what is it about?" Vera looked down at the child, considering. Perhaps she lost her mother and feared losing everything else. Perhaps the world became too large and frightening, and she needed to make it small again, small enough to fit in one hand. She gently squeezed Elspeth's hand, and the girl looked up at her with those serious eyes. "Perhaps I am simply the right size for her fear. Stranger enough to be safe, gentle enough to be trusted." "That's more philosophical than I expected," Xavier said, a hint of dry humor in his voice that Vera had not heard before. She found herself almost smiling. "I contain multitudes." "Apparently so." The first snow came in late November, dusting the world white and turning Vera's forest path treacherous. Xavier insisted she stay the night when she arrived that afternoon, rather than risk the walk home in the dark. And Vera found herself once again in the spare room with Elspeth curled against her side. But this time it felt less like an emergency and more like routine, and that thought troubled her more than she wanted to admit. She was getting too comfortable here, too attached. This was not her family, not her life. She was an orc living on the borders of human society, and Xavier was a human farmer trying to rebuild after tragedy. There was no future in this strange arrangement, only a slow entanglement that would make it harder to leave when the time finally came. But when she looked at Elspeth sleeping peacefully in the crook of her arm, she could not find it in herself to pull away. The winter deepened, and Vera's visits became less like visits and more like coming home. She had a chair at the table now, a peg for her cloak by the door, a drawer in the spare room where she kept a change of clothes for the nights she stayed over. She learned to cook the way Xavier liked his food, learned which chores he appreciated help with, and which he preferred to do himself. They moved around each other in the small cottage with increasing ease, like dancers learning each other's steps. Elspeth remained silent, but she grew stronger. Her appetite returned. She began to smile occasionally, small, quick expressions that came and went like sunlight through clouds. She followed Vera everywhere when the orc woman was present. And when Vera was not there, she returned to her waiting post by the window or on the front step, watching the forest path with patient intensity. "You're good for her," Xavier said one evening as they sat by the fire after Elspeth had gone to bed. "Better than any healer or medicine could have been. She's coming back to herself, bit by bit. I can see her mother in her expressions now. I can see the child she used to be." Vera stared into the flames, uncomfortable with the gratitude in his voice. "I've done nothing special, only been present. That's everything, though, isn't it? Just being there when someone needs you." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm grateful, more than you know." She glanced at him and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. There was gratitude, yes, but something else too, something warm and complicated that made her look away quickly. "It is late," she said, standing. "I should rest." "Of course. Good night, Vera." It was the first time he had used her name so casually, without hesitation or formality, and the sound of it in his low voice followed her all the way to her room. December arrived bitter and cold, with snow piling high against the cottage walls and ice forming in intricate patterns on the windows. Vera found herself staying more often than not now, 4 or 5 nights a week, telling herself it was because the weather made the journey difficult, but knowing deep down that the weather was only an excuse. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. She had begun to think of this place as home, of these people as hers to care for, and the realization terrified her. One particularly cold night, as she sat by the fire with Elspeth drowsing in her lap and Xavier working on a piece of carving across from her, she finally voiced the fear that had been growing in her chest. "This cannot continue forever," she said quietly. "You know that, yes? Eventually Elspeth will recover fully. Eventually she will not need me anymore, and then I will be a stranger in your home, an orc woman with no place among humans." Xavier's hand stilled on his carving. "Is that what you think?" he asked. "That you're here only because Elspeth needs you?" "What other reason could there be?" He set down the wood and knife, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older and more serious. "You want the truth, always. I think Elspeth needed you at first, yes. But somewhere along the way, I started needing you too. Not as a healer for my daughter, but as," he paused, searching for words, "as someone who makes this house feel less empty. As someone who listens when I talk and talks back with actual thoughts instead of just polite responses. As someone who fits here in a way I never expected." He met her eyes. "Does that frighten you?" "Yes," Vera said honestly. "It terrifies me." "Good," Xavier said, and there was a hint of a smile on his face. "It terrifies me too, but I think the good things usually do." They sat with that confession between them, the fire crackling, Elspeth breathing softly in sleep, and Vera felt something in her chest loosen and tighten all at once. She had spent so long alone, so long keeping herself separate from human society, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, not for what she could do or provide, but simply for being herself. "I do not know how to do this," she said finally. "Do what? This?" "Whatever this is becoming. I am not practiced at being part of a family." "Neither am I anymore," Xavier admitted. "I'm making it up as I go, same as you, but I think we're doing all right, don't you?" Vera looked around the cottage at the fire burning warm, at the child sleeping peacefully in her arms, at the man watching her with hope and affection in his eyes, and found herself nodding slowly. "Yes," she said. "I suppose we are." The turning point came a week later when Elspeth fell ill. It started as a simple cough, nothing alarming, but within 2 days she was burning with fever and struggling to breathe. Xavier sent for the village healer, who came and prescribed poultices and teas, but admitted there was little to be done, except wait and hope. Vera did not leave Elspeth's side for 3 days and 3 nights. She held the child through the worst of the fever, bathed her with cool water when she burned hot, wrapped her in blankets when she shivered with chills. Xavier worked beside her, fetching water and wood and whatever else was needed, but it was Vera's arms that Elspeth reached for when she woke delirious, Vera's voice that soothed her back to sleep. On the 3rd night, when the fever finally broke and Elspeth's breathing eased, Xavier found Vera sitting beside the bed with her head in her hands, exhausted beyond measure. He put a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her, saying nothing, just being present. "I thought I would lose her," Vera whispered. "I thought after all this, after everything, she would slip away and I could do nothing to stop it." "But you didn't lose her," Xavier said gently. "She's going to be all right, thanks to you, not just me. You were here too. We were both here. Together." He took her hand carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She did not. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for caring about her, about us." Vera looked at their joined hands as calloused from work, hers from different labors but equally strong, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. "I think," she said slowly, "I am staying not because I have to, but because I want to, because this has become home." "Because you have become," she paused, then finished quietly, "because you have become important to me, both of you." Xavier's hand tightened around hers. "Good," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. Can't imagine my life without you in it." "Is that too much too soon?" "Probably," Vera admitted. "But I find I do not care." They sat together in the quiet darkness, holding hands beside the sleeping child, and Vera felt something click into place that she had not known was missing. Elspeth recovered slowly but surely over the following weeks. The cough faded, her strength returned, and her appetite came back with a vengeance that had both Vera and Xavier working to keep up with her demands for food. But more than her physical recovery, it was the way she looked at them, at both of them together, that changed. Something had shifted during her illness, some understanding reached in her silent internal world, and she began for the first time to accept her father's presence alongside Vera's. She would sit between them now, holding both their hands. She would let Xavier carry her to bed while Vera followed behind. She would eat from either of their spoons, sleep with either of them nearby. It was not that she needed Vera less, but that she had finally allowed Xavier back into the circle of her trust. "She's healing," Xavier said one evening as they watched Elspeth play with a set of carved animals he had made for her. It was the first time she had played with anything since her mother's death, and the sight of it brought tears to Xavier's eyes that he did not bother to hide. Actually healing, not just surviving anymore, but living. "Children are resilient," Vera said, "more than we give them credit for." "She learned it from you," Xavier said. "How to be strong and gentle at the same time, how to trust again after loss." He reached out and took Vera's hand, the gesture natural now after weeks of growing closeness. "I think you've taught me that too." Vera laced her fingers through his, marveling at how right it felt. "You have taught me things as well, how to be part of something larger than myself, how to stop running from connection." She paused, then added softly, "How to be loved and to love in return." Xavier turned to face her fully, his dark eyes serious. "Is that what this is, then? Love?" "I believe so," Vera said. "Though I confess I am not expert in the matter, I only know that when I am here I feel complete in a way I never have before. That when I think of leaving I feel like I am tearing away part of myself. That when I look at you both I see," she stopped, struggling with the words. "I see home. I see family. I see the life I did not know I wanted until I found it." "Then stay," Xavier said simply. "Not as a visitor, not as a guest. Stay as part of this family. Stay as my—" he hesitated, then pushed forward. "Stay as my partner, my love, if you'll have me." Vera felt her breath catch. "You are asking me to stay permanently, to make a life here with you?" "Yes, if that's what you want too." She thought of her cottage in the forest, sitting empty and cold. She thought of her solitary life, the long, quiet years of isolation that had seemed like freedom but now felt like mere loneliness. And she thought of this warm cottage, this man with his gentle strength and his rough hands and his patient love, this child who had chosen her out of all the world to trust. "Yes," she said, "that is what I want." Xavier's smile was bright enough to rival the fire. He leaned forward and kissed her softly, carefully, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Vera kissed him back, pouring into it all the words she did not have, all the emotion she had kept locked away for so long. When they pulled apart, they found Elspeth watching them with wide eyes, her carved animals forgotten. For a long moment they waited, uncertain of her reaction. But then the child smiled a real smile, full and genuine, and crawled into Vera's lap, wrapping her arms around both of them. They sat like that for a long time, tangled together in front of the fire, a family formed not by blood but by choice and need and love. The winter passed in a blur of domesticity and deepening affection. Vera officially moved into the cottage, bringing her few possessions from her forest home and integrating them into Xavier's space until it became their space. She took over some of the household chores, rearranged the kitchen to suit her preferences, added touches of orcish decoration that Xavier admired and encouraged. They settled into the comfortable rhythm of partnership, learning each other's habits and quirks, arguing occasionally and making up quickly. Elspeth remained silent through it all, but her silence had changed from the empty quiet of trauma to something more peaceful. She was present now, engaged with the world around her, simply choosing not to speak. Vera and Xavier learned to read her expressions, her gestures, the complicated language she had developed to communicate without words. "You think she'll ever talk again?" Xavier asked one night as they lay in bed together, Vera's head on his shoulder. They had moved into the main bedroom weeks ago, leaving the spare room for Elspeth, though the child still crawled into bed with them most nights. "I do not know," Vera said honestly. "But I think she will speak when she is ready, when she has something she needs to say that cannot be said any other way. And if that never happens, then we will love her as she is and find other ways to hear her voice." Xavier pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're wise, you know that." "I am practical. There is a difference. I think you're both." They drifted toward sleep, warm and comfortable, and Vera thought about how strange it was that 6 months ago she had been alone in the forest and perfectly content. And now, she could not imagine sleeping without Xavier's heartbeat under her ear and Elspeth's small body curled at the foot of the bed. Spring came slowly, melting the snow in fits and starts, turning the world muddy and raw before the first green shoots appeared. Xavier began preparing the fields for planting, and Vera helped, her orcish strength making quick work of tasks that would have taken him days alone. They worked side by side in the warming sun, and for the first time in years, Xavier sang while he worked not just under his breath but full voice, old ballads and work songs that made Vera smile. Elspeth played in the garden they were preparing, helping in her own small way by collecting stones and arranging them in complicated patterns. She seemed happier than ever, her face fuller and healthier, her movements quick and purposeful. She had accepted completely that Vera was staying, that this arrangement was permanent, and she had blossomed in the security of that knowledge. One afternoon in early April, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold, Elspeth tugged on Vera's sleeve to get her attention. When Vera looked down, the child reached up and touched Vera's face gently, then pointed at herself, then at Xavier, then back at Vera. The question was clear. "Are we together? Are we a family?" "Yes, little one," Vera said softly. "We are family, all three of us." Elspeth smiled and settled into Vera's lap with a contented sigh, and that was when they heard it, soft and hesitant and unmistakable. "Stay," Elspeth whispered. Just one word, barely audible, but it was the first sound beyond crying that she had made in 7 months. Vera and Xavier froze, hardly daring to breathe. Vera looked down at the child in her lap with wonder and growing emotion. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Xavier asked carefully, kneeling beside them. Elspeth looked up at Vera with those serious eyes, and when she spoke again her voice was stronger. "Stay, please stay." "I am staying," Vera said, her voice thick. "I promise. I am not going anywhere, promise." Elspeth whispered, "I promise." Elspeth nodded, satisfied, and tucked herself back against Vera's chest. And then, in a voice that was small but determined, she added, "Love you." Vera felt tears sting her eyes, something that rarely happened. something she had thought herself too hardened for, and she wrapped her arms around the child, holding her close. "I love you too, little one, so very much." Xavier was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it, and he wrapped his arms around both of them, the three of them huddled together in the fading light. "Welcome back, sweetheart," he murmured into his daughter's hair. "We missed your voice." That night, after Elspeth was asleep in her own bed for once, Vera and Xavier sat by the fire and talked about the future. About planting the fields and what crops would grow best, about repairs the cottage needed before next winter, about whether they should get a second cow or perhaps some pigs. Normal things, domestic things, the kind of conversations that bound lives together. And then Xavier said, "We should make it official." Vera looked at him questioningly. "Our partnership," he clarified. "We should marry. If you want to, I mean. I know humans and orcs don't usually. I know there might be complications with the village, with legal matters. But I want everyone to know that you're my family, that this is permanent, that I choose you and you choose me and we're building this life together." Vera considered this carefully. Marriage is a human custom. Orcs bind themselves differently, with pledges and shared purpose rather than ceremonies. "Then we'll do both," Xavier said. "Whatever you want. However you want to mark this commitment, I'm willing. I just want the world to know you're mine and I'm yours." Vera felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Yes," she said. "Yes, let us make it official, in whatever way works for both our peoples." They married in late May in a simple ceremony that blended human and orcish traditions. The village priest was reluctant at first, but Xavier's quiet insistence and the testimony of several neighbors who had seen how Vera had healed Elspeth convinced him to perform the service. They stood in front of the cottage under the apple tree that was just beginning to bloom, with Elspeth as their only witness, and spoke their vows. Xavier promised to cherish and protect, to work beside her and build a life together, to honor her people as she honored his. Vera pledged her strength and her loyalty, promised to defend their family and their home, to share his burdens and his joys. They exchanged simple iron rings that Xavier had forged himself, and when the priest pronounced them bound, they kissed while Elspeth clapped and laughed with delight. The village slowly, grudgingly, came to accept their union. Some people never would, and Vera learned to ignore the stares and whispered comments when she accompanied Xavier to town for supplies or to sell produce. But others, particularly those who had children and could understand the miracle of Elspeth's recovery, welcomed her cautiously. She was the orc woman who had saved the Thorn girl, the strange creature who had proven herself more human than some humans in her capacity for love. Summer came in full force, and with it came abundance. The fields produced better than Xavier had seen in years, whether from Vera's help or simple good fortune he could not say. Elspeth grew taller and stronger, her voice returning more each day until she was chattering constantly, making up for lost time with enthusiastic stories and observations. She called Vera Mother without prompting or discussion, as naturally as breathing, and Vera's heart clenched with joy every time she heard it. They settled into the comfortable rhythm of family life, each day bringing small pleasures and minor challenges that they faced together. Xavier taught Vera to dance one evening when he was feeling playful, and she taught him orcish fighting techniques in return, laughing as he tried to master the stances. Elspeth learned to help with chores, feeding chickens and collecting eggs, pulling weeds in the garden and making elaborate meals of mud and flower petals for her carved animal friends. One warm evening in late August, nearly a year after Vera had first found Elspeth lost in the woods, they sat together on the front step watching the sunset. Elspeth was between them, holding both their hands, swinging her legs and humming tunelessly. "Are you happy?" Xavier asked Vera quietly. She thought about the question seriously, taking stock of her life. She thought of her cottage in the forest, long since abandoned, reclaimed by the woods. She thought of her solitary years, the isolation she had thought was freedom. And she thought of this family, this home, this complicated, beautiful life they had built together from loss and need and unexpected love. "Yes," she said simply. "I am happier than I ever thought possible." "Good," Xavier said, squeezing her hand. "So am I." Elspeth looked up at them both, her face serious in the way children's faces become when they are about to say something important. "We're all happy," she announced, "because we're all together, and we're going to stay together forever and ever, right?" "Right," Vera agreed, pulling the child into her lap. "Forever and ever. Promise?" "I promise." Elspeth grinned, satisfied, and launched into a long, complicated story about the adventures her carved animals had that day. Vera and Xavier listened with half their attention. The other half focused on each other, on the feeling of family and home and belonging that wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The sun set slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the three of them sat together watching until the first stars appeared and the fireflies began their nightly dance. Inside the cottage, a fire waited to be lit, dinner waited to be cooked, a whole evening of family life waited to unfold. But for now they simply sat in the gathering dusk, holding hands, whole and healed and home. As autumn returned, and the year came full circle, Vera found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. She stood in the garden one afternoon, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables before the first frost, and watched Elspeth chase butterflies through the grass, while Xavier repaired the barn roof. This was her life now, these people, this place, this quiet domestic happiness that she had never sought but could no longer imagine living without. Elspeth ran up to her, breathless and flushed, holding a perfectly preserved yellow leaf. "Look, Mother, isn't it beautiful?" "Very beautiful," Vera agreed, admiring it properly. "I want to keep it forever," Elspeth declared, "to remember this day. Then we shall press it in a book and save it," Vera said, "so you can remember." Elspeth hugged her fiercely around the waist, then ran off to show Xavier her treasure. Vera watched her go with a smile, then returned to her harvesting, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the work. That evening, after Elspeth was asleep, and they sat by the fire working on their respective projects, Vera mending clothes, Xavier carving a new set of wooden bowls, Xavier spoke into the comfortable silence. "I never thought I would be this happy again," he said quietly. "After Martha died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I would just exist, going through the motions until Elspeth was grown. But you came along and changed everything. You brought my daughter back to me, and then you gave me a second chance at love. I don't know how to thank you for that." Vera set down her mending and looked at him seriously. "You do not need to thank me. I am not here out of charity or obligation. I am here because I want to be, because you and Elspeth have given me gifts as well. You gave me a family. You gave me a home. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living." She paused, then added softly, "You gave me love, Xavier. Real love, the kind I thought existed only in stories. That is worth more than any thanks." Xavier set aside his carving and moved to sit beside her, pulling her into his arms. She went willingly, settling against his chest with a contentment that still surprised her sometimes with its intensity. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here, giving up your independence, your solitary life?" Vera thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I miss the quiet of the forest," she admitted. "The simplicity of living for myself alone, but I do not regret leaving it behind. This life, This family, it is more complex, more challenging, but also infinitely richer. I would not trade it for anything. Even when Elspeth is being difficult, even when I'm grumpy about the weather or the crops, even when the villagers stare and whisper, even then, Vera confirmed. The difficulties are part of the richness. They are what make this real, make it matter. A life without challenges is not a life at all, just a comfortable existence. Xavier pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You're philosophical tonight. The harvest season makes me reflective. They sat in comfortable silence, holding each other, listening to the fire crackle and the wind moving through the trees outside. From Elspeth's room came the soft sound of the child talking in her sleep, words too muffled to make out but clearly happy. She's dreaming, Xavier noted. Good dreams, I think, because she's safe and loved and home. Yes, Vera agreed. Because of that, winter came again, and with it the anniversary of Vera's permanent move into the cottage. They did not celebrate it formally. Xavier had forgotten the exact date, and Vera did not particularly care, but one evening as they sat together after dinner, Elspeth made an announcement. I want to make a special meal, she declared. For Mother, to say thank you for staying with us. Vera smiled. That is very kind, little one, but unnecessary. I want to, Elspeth insisted. Father will help me, right, Father? Xavier grinned. Right, what are we making? Everything Mother likes best, Elspeth said confidently. The stew with carrots and potatoes and the bread with herbs and the apple cake you taught me to make. That is quite the feast, Vera said, touched. When shall we have this special meal? Tomorrow, Elspeth announced. I'll start planning now. She ran to get paper and charcoal to sketch out her ideas, leaving Xavier and Vera alone. She's got your tendency for grand gestures, Vera observed, and your tendency for showing love through actions rather than words, Xavier replied. She's learning from both of us. The next day was indeed a production, with Elspeth directing operations in the kitchen, while Xavier and Vera followed her increasingly complicated instructions. The child had planned everything down to the smallest detail: how the table should be set, what candles should be lit, even what everyone should wear. Xavier caught Vera's eye at one point, and they shared a look of amused affection, both of them understanding that this elaborate production was Elspeth's way of processing and expressing the security and happiness she felt in their family. The meal itself was delicious, even if some of the dishes were slightly burned or over-seasoned from Elspeth's enthusiastic participation. They ate by candlelight, and Elspeth gave a long, rambling speech about how much she loved her mother and father and how lucky she was to have them both, which had Vera blinking back tears and Xavier openly weeping into his napkin. After dinner, as they cleared the table together, Elspeth tugged on Vera's sleeve. "Do you like your special meal?" she asked anxiously. "I loved it," Vera assured her, kneeling down to the child's level. "It was the most wonderful meal I have ever had. Because I made it for you." "Because you made it for me," Vera confirmed. "Because every bite was full of love. That is the best ingredient of all." Elspeth threw her arms around Vera's neck and whispered, "I'm glad you found me in the woods. I'm glad you didn't leave me there." Vera hugged her back, holding the child close. "I am glad too, little one. So very glad." That night, lying in bed with Xavier beside her and Elspeth asleep down the hall, Vera found herself thinking about how fragile the path to happiness could be. How one different choice, leaving Elspeth in the woods for someone else to find, refusing to return for that first visit, running away when the attachment became too strong, would have changed everything. How easily this family might never have formed, these bonds might never have been built. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked drowsily, feeling her restlessness. "About chance," Vera said. "About how easily this all might never have happened. But it did happen, Xavier pointed out. We found each other, that's what matters. Yes, Vera agreed, that is what matters. She settled against him, letting his warmth and solidity anchor her, pushing away the thoughts of what might have been in favor of what was. This was real. This was hers. This family, this home, this life, she had chosen it and it had chosen her, and that was enough. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and with them came the small joys and challenges of family life. Elspeth lost her first tooth and carefully saved it under her pillow for the tooth fairy, waking in the morning to find a copper coin that Xavier had snuck in during the night. Vera taught the child to identify plants in the forest, the safe ones and the poisonous ones, the ones that could heal and the ones that could harm. Xavier showed her how to carve simple shapes from wood, and soon the cottage was full of lopsided birds and animals that they all admired as masterpieces. They had arguments, as all families do, about discipline strategies for Elspeth, about how to manage the farm, about whose turn it was to deal with the difficult merchant in town. But they learned to fight fair, to listen to each other, to apologize and forgive. They learned to be partners in truth, not just in name. The village's acceptance grew slowly but steadily. A few of the other farmers began coming to Vera for advice on preparing fields or dealing with stubborn animals, finding that her orc strength and practical knowledge made her a valuable resource. Some of the village women, initially suspicious, warmed to her when they saw how gentle she was with Elspeth, how devoted to her family. Children lost their fear of her first, as children always do, drawn by her fascinating appearance and her willingness to play elaborate games and tell strange stories from orc culture. By the time Elspeth's 7th birthday came around, nearly 2 years after that day in the woods, they threw a small party, and several families from the village actually attended. Elspeth ran wild with the other children, showing off her carved animals and the small wooden sword Xavier had made for her, and Vera found herself in conversations with other parents about ordinary things, recipes and weather, and the challenges of raising children. "She's thriving," one of the mothers said to Vera, nodding toward Elspeth. "You've done well with her, both of you have." "Thank you," Vera said, surprised and pleased by the acknowledgement. "It's not what anyone expected," the woman continued. "When we heard Xavier had taken up with an orc, well, there was talk, but you've proven yourself. Not many would have done what you did for that child." "I did only what was needed," Vera said. "That's all any of us can do," the woman replied. "But you did it when it mattered most. That counts for something." That evening, after the party guests had left and Elspeth had fallen asleep in a sugar-induced stupor surrounded by her new toys, Xavier and Vera sat on the front step in the warm spring air. "We've built something good here," Xavier said, his arm around Vera's shoulders. "Against all odds, despite everything that should have kept us apart, we've built something real and lasting." "Yes," Vera agreed, "we have." "You think you'll ever stop surprising me?" he asked fondly. "I certainly hope not," Vera replied. "Life would be terribly boring otherwise." Xavier laughed and pulled her closer, and they sat together watching the stars come out one by one, comfortable in their silence and in each other's presence. Another year passed, and then another, and the three of them grew together into a seamless unit. Elspeth shot up like a weed, all gangly limbs and boundless energy, losing the last baby softness from her face and beginning to look like the young lady she would become. She was bright and curious, equally comfortable helping Xavier in the fields or following Vera into the forest to forage, absorbing knowledge from both her parents and synthesizing it into her own unique worldview. "She's going to be formidable when she's grown," Xavier observed one day as they watched her negotiate with a traveling merchant for a better price on ribbons. Smart and confident and absolutely unafraid. She learned from the best, Vera said with a slight smile. Yes, Xavier agreed. She learned from you, from both of us, Vera corrected. She has your kindness and my stubbornness, your patience and my determination. The best of both. Xavier squeezed her hand. And our love, that's what matters most, that's what healed her when nothing else could. They watched as Elspeth successfully concluded her negotiation, skipping back to them with her ribbons and a smug expression. I got them for half price, she announced proudly. Well done, clever girl, Vera said, ruffling her hair. Can we get sweet buns now? You promised sweet buns. I did indeed, Xavier confirmed. Come on, then, to the bakery. They walked through town together, the three of them, and Vera noticed how natural it had become, how few stares they attracted anymore, how many people nodded greetings as they passed. She was no longer the strange orc woman who had appeared mysteriously. She was simply Vera Thorne, Xavier's wife and Elspeth's mother, a member of the community in her own right. It was a strange feeling, belonging. Vera had spent so many years as an outsider that she had forgotten what it felt like to be part of something larger. But here, in this small farming village on the edge of human and orc territories, she had found her place. That evening, with Elspeth tucked into bed and the cottage quiet around them, Xavier gave Vera a carved wooden box he had been working on for weeks. She opened it to find a delicate necklace inside a simple leather cord strung with beads of carved wood, each one shaped like a different symbol. A tree for growth, a fire for warmth, a bird for freedom, a heart for love. It's beautiful, Vera breathed, running her fingers over the beads. Each one represents something about our life together, Xavier explained. I've been working on it since winter. I wanted to give you something that showed how much these years have meant to me, how much you mean to me. Vera fastened the necklace around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle against her collarbone. I will treasure it always, she said quietly, as I treasure you. As I treasure this life we have built. Xavier pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the firelight, holding each other close. Two people from different worlds who had found in each other everything they needed. The years continued to pass, marked by harvests and birthdays, by small triumphs and minor setbacks, by the steady accumulation of memories that make a life. Elspeth grew into a young woman, tall and confident, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's fierce protectiveness. She spoke openly about having two mothers, the one who gave her life and the one who gave it back to her, and she loved them both without contradiction. When she was 12, she asked Vera about orc culture, about the traditions and histories of Vera's people. Vera taught her what she knew, taking her into the highlands to meet other orcs and learn from them. Elspeth absorbed it all eagerly, declaring that she was part orc by choice if not by blood, and she would honor that heritage as much as her human one. When she was 14, she asked Xavier about her mother Martha, wanting to know everything he could remember. He told her stories late into the night, stories of Martha's laughter and her kindness, her love of music and her terrible cooking, all the small details that made her real. Elspeth cried and laughed and asked questions, and by the end, she understood that it was possible to love both her mothers without diminishing either one. You're lucky, one of her friends said once, watching Vera demonstrate an orcish fighting technique during a village gathering. Not everyone gets a mother who can lift a full-grown man over her head. I know, Elspeth replied with a grin. I'm lucky in lots of ways. And she was. They all were. On the 5th anniversary of Vera and Xavier's marriage, they held a small celebration with close friends from the village. Elspeth, now a bright and capable young woman of 12, had planned most of it herself, decorating the cottage and preparing food with Vera's help. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, the three of them stood together looking out at the land they had cultivated together, the home they had built. "You remember the day we met?" Xavier asked Vera quietly. "When you came out of the forest holding Elspeth's hand?" "Every detail," Vera replied. "You looked like a man being torn apart by fear. I thought you would strike me at first, seeing an orc with your daughter." "I probably should have," Xavier admitted, "according to every story I'd ever heard, but I was too desperate to care about old prejudices. All I cared about was that Elspeth was safe." "And now?" Vera asked. "Now I thank whatever gods or luck or fate brought you to us that day," Xavier said. "Now I cannot imagine any version of my life that doesn't have you in it." Elspeth, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Do you ever regret it, Mother, giving up your freedom to stay with us?" Vera looked down at the girl, not so much a girl anymore, really, but blossoming into young womanhood, and smiled. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "I traded one kind of freedom for another. The freedom to be alone for the freedom to belong. The freedom to need no one for the freedom to be needed. And I know which one is more precious." Elspeth hugged her tightly. "I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you didn't let go of my hand that day." "I am glad too, little one. More than I can ever express." They stood together as the sun set, three silhouettes against the fading light, bound together by love and choice and all the small moments that had accumulated into a life. Inside the cottage, the fire burned warm and welcoming. The table was still scattered with the remnants of celebration. The beds were waiting, soft and comfortable, for the family that would sleep in them. This was home. This was family. This was everything that mattered. And as Vera looked at Xavier on one side and Elspeth on the other, both of them holding her hands just as Elspeth had in the forest all those years ago, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice, that every step that had led her here had been worth it, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The stars came out one by one, bright and clear in the darkening sky, and the world settled into the peaceful quiet of evening. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The wind moved gently through the fields, rustling the growing crops. The cottage stood solid and sure, a beacon of warmth and light in the darkness. Inside, Elspeth yawned and declared she was going to bed, hugging both her parents good night before disappearing into her room. Xavier and Vera stood at the window a moment longer, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "Happy anniversary," Xavier murmured. "Happy anniversary," Vera replied. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars, and Vera thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How a single moment a child lost in the woods, a hand reaching out, a choice to stay could change everything. How the things we think we need are so often different from the things we actually need. How love can find us in the most unexpected places, with the most unexpected people. She had been alone for so long, self-sufficient and independent, needing nothing and no one. And then a small hand had gripped hers in the forest, and she had discovered that being needed was not the burden she had always thought it was. That being part of a family was not a loss of self, but an expansion of it. That love, when given and received freely, made everything richer and deeper and more meaningful. "Come to bed," Xavier said softly. "Tomorrow will be here soon enough." They banked the fire and blew out the candles, moving through the nighttime routine they had performed hundreds of times before. Into their room, into their bed, curled together in the darkness. Outside, the world slept. Inside, everything was safe and warm and home. Vera closed her eyes, Xavier's heart beat steady beneath her ear, and let herself drift toward sleep. Her last conscious thought was of gratitude for this man, this child, this life. For the courage to stay when everything in her wanted to run. For the willingness to open her heart when it had been closed for so long. She had found them in the woods, or perhaps they had found her. It did not matter which. What mattered was that they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had become whole. The night deepened, and the cottage settled into stillness. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in their love and in their belonging. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent and eternal. The forest whispered its secrets to the wind. The fields dreamed of summer's abundance. The world turned on, as it always had and always would. But in that small cottage on the edge of the borderlands, 3 lives had been forever changed and forever bound together. A man who had lost everything and learned to love again. A woman who had needed nothing and discovered she needed everything. A child who had been lost and found, silenced and made whole. They had become a family not through blood or tradition, but through choice and need and the fierce determination to hold on to what mattered most. They had built something real and lasting from the ruins of loss and the gift of unexpected connection. They had found their way home to each other, and in doing so, had created a home that would endure. And that, Vera knew as she drifted into sleep, was everything. That was more than enough. That was exactly right.